Jeremy, thanks so much, man, for hopping on the Next Level Minds podcast.
Great to be here and great to hang out today.
For sure. I know we were just talking about this before we recorded, but besides the nice weather, what made you move from Chicago to Miami, of course?
I'm supposed to be here.
Yeah.
I think every dollar earned was a how fast can I get to Florida?
Mm.
So it was always my dream to get out and be on the beach, shovel sand, not snow. But I've also been given a lot of good guidance over the years to like live where people vacation so that you don't always want to leave your home. And I took that advice to heart really early on, but just never executed. So
Mm.
a couple of years back, I just pulled the trigger and finally moved down here, and I'm not going back to Chicago. So
Yes.
weather and taxes is what I tell people.
Yeah, yeah. I was gonna say, like, I've messed around on Zillow. Not that I would ever move like the Northeast, but just seeing, like, all right, if I bought my same house that I have in the Southeast in the Northeast, like, what would that be property tax wise? And you're just like, what in the world is going
Yeah,
on? So,
night and day
um,
difference.
yeah, man, I'm on a similar boat. My wife and I were in Charlotte, North Carolina, and then I'm from Charleston, South Carolina originally, but we've been wanting to move back here for like 2 or 3 years now, and so it's kind of like every dollar we were earning, we were just stashing away for a down payment so we could keep our previous house as a rental. But same thing, like most all of our weekend trips and holidays, like July 4th, all that, we're driving 3 hours from Charlotte to Charleston. We're looking at
Yep.
our travel budget last year, and we're like Charleston, 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 Charleston. So I was like, we're gonna save a good bit of money, I feel like, on travel at the end of the day. So
I'm pretty sure my wife said that too. She was like, every weekend that we have even 5 minutes extra, we're going to Miami or we're going somewhere warm or an island or tropical. So like, why do we even live here? And being an entrepreneur, working remote, it was like, why not? What are we waiting for? So I finally
yeah,
pulled the trigger. It was definitely a massive shock, and I think in general, just coming down here was tough. I talk about that on another podcast I did
mm,
recently, where it was just like I didn't know what to expect. A lot of the resources and things that you have, you just get in a comfort zone. So it was a good break. It was a good challenge, and
yeah.
now I love it.
Yeah. And just like, I feel like it's super important, especially when you're running your own business, to surround yourself with success. You know, you are who you hang around and associate with. And the few times I've been to Miami, it's like Lamborghini, high rise condo. I mean, yeah, that's kind of the glamour, but I've also done some business stuff down there too. And I've met like some very powerful entrepreneurs, startup people. And it's like, if you're in the business world, I feel like that's super important to be in a good environment.
I think it's a good lifestyle, and I would say those people who have built a really solid lifestyle and are past kind of the build phase, they're here.
Yeah.
Whether it's not full time, but part time, you definitely bump into the right people. But I also think it is just lifestyle, right?
Mm.
So it's a really healthy lifestyle. Being able to just immediately shut down and take a break and walk out to the beach and you're on vacation, that was important to me because it's work hard, play hard, right? So, you spend enough time behind a computer, like just to go walk out to the ocean and just decompress for a minute, get grounded for a second.
Yeah.
It's worth its weight in gold, despite the cost of living here.
Yeah, yeah, no, man, that's a super good point. And speaking of this, the world of business and the build phase, I know you've kind of been an entrepreneur since you were 6 years old, which I would love to hear kind of about your background, what got you started in business, and how that kind of shaped where you are today.
So I was born into it and indoctrinated probably in the crib. My parents were in every multi-level marketing thing you could possibly imagine. They were, everybody was kind of ringing a bell in front of them to be entrepreneurial. My father started a car wash and
Mm.
all sorts of other businesses. None of them were tremendously successful, but I got to see that growing up. And they were the ones that kind of egged me on early on because there was always something, some new thing, new business, new venture that they were trying to build. And so I got to see that firsthand really, really early. I sat in a stroller in a company called Prepaid Legal Services. Like I remember, vividly remember sitting in multi-level marketing meetings, while I was in a stroller. So I think it was early on, like Think and Grow Rich was a book that was talked about when I was really young. So I think that was just immediately brought into my life. And then I had an early success, which is that, lemonade stand story that I tell everybody so many times. My father was like, hey, I'll borrow you money, put it on a chalkboard. Here's what you owe me. There's interest, and we're going to go to the store. We went to Aldi and bought some stuff, and I bought this like building block set and made my own, lemonade stand. That stand turned into, a microwave oven. Then I bought a pizza oven. It turned into like a real business, and I got shut down by the health department.
No.
So I learned, like, I mean, it actually did insanely well. I made a couple $1,000s over the summer, and it was over. It was like, okay, I felt it. And then I, learned about regulatory and compliance really quickly. Hey, you have to have, there's a health code violation here. A kid is selling hot dogs, and I was competing with the local hot dog stand. It was great for me. And then from there, it was a never ending push to be entrepreneurial. And I had a great career. I worked in the manufacturing space, and kind of was born into a really amazing career. Ended up being a global vice president for, billions and $1 billion company. And that was awesome because I was able to do that and still have my side hustles,
Mm.
which I actually had exits while I had a career. So I had built things and sold them while I was working a full-time real career, and moved up from literally lowest on the totem pole to eventually being the vice president, global marketing and communications, across the world, which was great. And while I did that, I had so much fun and experience in taking my own money, bootstrap founded every company I built. And it's really been an amazing ride. And since then, now I get to build the things I want to build because I can now focus my time and energy on it because I've had some successes along the way. A lot of failures, but a couple successes usually negate the failures.
Yeah, and I feel like the first setback was getting shut down by the health department with your
That
lemonade
was the
stand.
first one. And then I took all of that money and I bought an arcade game.
Hmm.
So I thought, okay, now I can buy this big stand-up arcade and kids will come and put coins in it. And, my father had this car wash business. So I thought, okay, people will come in here and they'll just put money into it and my money will make money.
Yeah.
And it failed. Failed
Mm.
horribly. I was my best customer, right? I was putting the same quarter in over and over and over again. And kids apparently don't go with their parents to have their car detailed. So it died. It was another business that was a failure. But the reality was, like, what a great experience for someone that age to learn so early.
Mm.
And then I had the bug the rest of my life.
Yeah.
I had ideas, and I was always looking at things differently than everyone else and trying to find gaps in markets. And
Mm.
so it was always fun for me, and became my hobby, really.
Yeah, and I think your story is super unique. I was looking on your LinkedIn and you just alluded to this, but I was like, okay, global VP, and looked like you've been in that manufacturing company for a while. But then I started looking at all the companies that you had founded, and I was like, wait a second, these years are overlapping. Looks like he's done all this while he was, in that manufacturing job. So can you kind of touch on that a little bit, maybe around like starting around like that 20-year old
Yeah.
range? Because we have a lot of like mid 20-year-olds that are listening to the podcast that are in that 8 to 5, but they're like either doing a side hustle or want to have a business on the side. So I think if you kind of started around that age and explained how you slowly started building things on the side, that'd be awesome.
I mean, I think everyone knew me early on as I always had some business I was involved in.
Mm.
So I met the CEO of that company. His name was Gary Weinmaster. And, I met him at a trade show, or so. I can't remember exactly where we had run into each other. And I, at the time, was doing web development. So I pitched him to, hey, like, you have this manufacturing company. I'd love to do the website. And I don't know why he gravitated towards me, but he said, why don't you come into my office and we'll talk? And I got a shot at it. And I was like, okay, this can be a huge customer. And he gave me the business. So he said, but I want you to come into the office so that we can see, progress. And so I built the website, and he dragged me into a meeting to ask, one of the people that were in marketing, hey, can you just, go through this plan of how you're going to build and how you're going to extract all the information from the company. And in that meeting, I think I made a pretty big impact. So I ended up getting a job offer, and I said, hey, listen, I'm willing to take the job, but I have this side business that I don't want to let go of because it's
Mm.
successful and it's kind of really the only thing I'm doing right now. And I have a lot of clients. And he said, I don't care as long as you do the job. And so I took a job as a web developer for this manufacturing company and slowly built my career, which was, it was more than full time. So the people that punch in it and do the 8 to 5 or 9 to 5, whatever it is, I had a 12, 18-hour day career.
Mm.
I was striving to move up the chain. I took huge, huge risks and did everything I could to put myself in a position to be a huge value contributor to the company. And in doing that, like every waking hour I had left was building other stuff.
Mm.
So I was burning 20-hour days, 7 days a week, every day of the year, trying to build a company on the side. And there was some crossover. Don't get me wrong. Like there were some times where I was taking calls at work, but
Yep.
I had set that up with, the company when I started,
Yeah.
and the company continued to be successful and grow and grow. And what an awesome, awesome ride it was to be in that position and then move up. And then I was marketing director. I actually, at one point, took a picture of all the business cards I had. It was like web developer, marketing manager, director of marketing, global vice president of marketing communications. And then we went public and I got to ring an opening bell at NASDAQ. So it was like it was a real amazing story of a great career. But behind the scenes, it was tremendous sacrifice. And I mean, to a degree of not sleeping, not being healthy, no relationships, friendships just crumbled. I mean, I sacrificed everything. So I think it's a story that I have. I don't recommend everybody to do the same thing I did. Like it definitely wasn't healthy. And then, there's um, a lot of repair that comes after that. After you've had some success, you're like, now you're going back to fix things. You're like,
Yeah.
okay, well, I wasn't healthy for 20 years. So you gain a lot of weight and, just all of the other things that come along with those sacrifices. And then you're like, okay, I have success. And people say it's lonely at the top because that's what happens, right? You
Mm.
burn. So I think there's a healthier way to do it. I would tell people to, have a laser focus, but if they want to do it fast and they want to, sacrifice certain things, it's worth it. But if you're coming home after work and you're sitting on the couch and you're turning Netflix on, you're not going to build this business. I mean, it's nothing short of a Herculean effort to build a side hustle. It's
Hmm.
tough. And you got to weigh in what you're willing to sacrifice up front. And you have to look at the outcome. What are you actually trying to get out of it? Because most people, for them, they're like, I'm trying to replace my job so I have freedom. You're barking up the wrong tree.
Right.
Side hustle becomes a full-time thing. Full-time thing is way more work than the job that you have.
Yeah. And
There's
because
no punching. There's no
you,
punching out.
you have ownership of like everything, right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah. You wear 100 hats, and people don't realize they're like, yeah, but if I make enough money, I can hire a bunch of people to do stuff. And it's like, then you're not as profitable and you don't make as much money. And yes, you're building valuation of the company, which is great. Most people don't look at exit because they have one idea.
yeah, yeah.
I had a billion ideas. I'm one of a very small group of people that are like, I have a list, which I think this is the year I expose that list because I'm never going to do all these things
Yeah.
every day. And my wife and my business partners and everybody else, like, nope, no more idea. Stop. Like no more business ideas. We got to hold you to the fire of one at a time. But some of them have been tremendously successful. Others haven't. So I think if you're trying to build a side hustle, you really have to sit down and look at what you're trying to build and what's the end result. Like, is
Mm.
that really what you want to build? Does it align with the lifestyle that you want to create for yourself?
Mm.
And I think being a little bit more purposeful upfront rather than it's just being about money will help the end result, right? Because you get to the end and now you're like, well, great. I have this awesome job now. I make exactly the replacement money, but now I have to work 20 hours a week. I
For the
can't
same
leave
amount.
my desk. It's not remote. I need to be on site. Like,
Mm.
I built I don't know. I have a friend who owns a barbershop and he's like, this is awesome. He left. He's like, I'm going to build my side hustle. I have my own barbershop. And I'm like, try going on vacation.
Mm.
You used to be able to take vacations. Now you can't. If you're
Yeah.
not there, you're not making money.
Yeah.
So it's a different, it's golden handcuffs.
Mm.
I built this thing, but it doesn't align with what I actually want in the end of this. And so for some people that's exit. They're like, I have another idea, or I have it's going to be worth so much that I'll have a great exit. Then you should plan for that and really look at like, what is the end result of the exit? Are you going to get a 2x
Mm.
multiple and sell it? And now you're like, okay, now I need to start all over again. And I signed, non-compete, so I can't stay in the same industry. There's a lot of those
Yeah.
things that you have to really look at. And I think people go into their side hustle just money focused.
Mm.
And that's okay. You have to do that. I did it. I'm definitely guilty of it. But I was also in survivalist mode.
Mm.
And I think a lot of people do that first. So humble beginnings, especially for me, um, coming from where I came from, it was like, I just want to get out of a bad situation. And so it was just money focused. It wasn't focused about lifestyle or health or, having some balance or any kind of equilibrium at all. It was just purely how much money can I make?
Yeah.
So for anyone in that like mindset, just take one step back. You don't have to like fully go back and
Mm.
like have analysis paralysis of like how is this all going to play out, but at least look at it and know what you're getting yourself into before you build it. And then you have to make the investment, and that's time.
Yeah.
You know,
And you said money focus. So was that in regards to just extra income, or was that starting it with the end goal of exiting, or honestly both?
I never had the end goal of exiting
Okay.
anything until later on in life. I learned my place in business.
Hmm.
So I think my initial onset was this is the best idea ever. It's going to be worth billions of dollars. Didn't matter what I was involved in. I had no clue what I was doing. I had no mentors. I recommend people have healthy mentorship along the way. I wish I did. I didn't. So I had to figure out a lot of stuff through trial and error. And I think, it was purely just how much money could I make?
Hmm.
It wasn't about exit. And then exits came about because I was propositioned with one and I went, wait a second, this is like a fast forward button of time. So I don't have to take any risk. I don't have to operate the company. And you're going to pay me for 2 or 3 or 4 years worth of my profit with no risk of like
Yeah.
competitors or
Mm.
some kind of leapfrog technology or whatever. And so this is like a cheat code. I
Yeah.
could build something, get it to a point, and somebody else is like, I can do it better than you. Like, okay, great. Give me 10x and I'll walk away from it. And that became my new like game genie for business. I was like, okay, I have the cheat code now. I can apply this to the next business. And I love building stuff. So I found my place. I'm not going to say I'm a terrible operator, but I get bored like most anybody. There's some monotony when you start to operate your same business and you're in year
Yeah.
3 and year 4 and year 5. You're probably like biting your fingernails, like, what did I sign up for? Like, this
Mm.
isn't, I want to get out and do something different. Unless you have some really unique business that you're involved in. That's not the case. It becomes pretty monotonous, which is also why people say, like, don't make your passion your business because it could
Mm.
ruin it. Right. So for me, it was like, this is such a great tool for me to get I don't know if it's ADD or what it is, but I was able to do all of these different things and apply this exit strategy to it. And that was successful for me. I wouldn't say that's going to be successful for everyone. So yeah, it was for me, it was just purely how much money could I make? And then as exit came along, it was like, okay, how do I replicate this model? And then I started putting criteria into the things I was building.
Mm.
I want reoccurring revenue. That was a great addition. Like, I hate chasing onesie, twosie sales all the time, every day, every day, every day. I would love something to be recurring. Software became a big focus because I was a developer. And then I started bringing on developers, and it was like, okay, this is even a better business because tech has so much value. A lot of people that didn't have tech. So I was like, okay, an enabler. So as I started building more and more criteria today, most of that's about how does it fit into my lifestyle?
Mm.
I like to travel. I want to be able to work remotely. The recurring revenue makes money while I sleep, and all of these other things. Like, is there purpose behind it? Is there an actual mission? Am I improving something or bringing value beyond what's traditional? All of those things became check boxes for me as I was building the next company and learned through failures or bad exits along the way. I was like, okay, next time I don't want a business with inventory that expires.
Mm.
That was like check. Don't like
Yeah.
that business. Your business could expire in three months. I was in the supplement business for a very short period of time.
Mm.
And it was like, you'd have a shelf full of products that could expire. So I mean, those are things you learn through,
Trial
trial
and
and
error.
error or
Yeah.
horrible failures. So
Yeah.
I'll
Yeah.
call them expensive education, along the
Did
way.
so I know you've had like some great exits, I believe across what, eight different companies, I want to say.
Sure. There's been several good ones and there's been
Yeah.
several bad ones.
So how
Uh,
did you like, sorry to cut you off there. I'm just
Sure,
curious, like
sure.
when you were at the manufacturing company and you started the side hustle, right? So did you like have a co-operator, or like how did the business just like turn so much that it could sell while you were also working for the company? Because like I love your story. I think it's super unique, but like everyone I've talked to that's exited a business, like it was like did the company, jumped full time into the side hustle, then scaled it, then sold it. So I'm like, I love your situation, but I'm just curious, like a little bit tactically how you did it, you know?
So it's all about good people. I mean, I
Hmm,
think that's the first element. People have to believe in your mission, your vision.
for sure.
And I think if you get people on board to do that, you can slowly build these things on the side. If you're not trying to race for a top line and you care about bottom line, they can grow sustainably and slowly. And as long as the bottom line's good, you'd be surprised. Like, I think a lot of people start and they're so revenue, they're like, I need more sales, 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 but they totally negate profitability.
Hmm. Yeah.
So, some of the greatest stories I've ever heard about companies that are worth crazy, crazy valuations are companies who were bottom line focused. They were the race was to profitability, not top line revenue. Um, so I think there's a company called Basecamp. I cannot find for the life of me the interview with the CEO, but he's one of those people that built an insanely amazing company, bottom line focused. He didn't care about top line. They weren't like, let me get more customers. They were like, let me serviceably grow. And all they cared about was profitability. Like, are
Hmm.
we stable and profitable early on? Which this word runway with startups is such a danger zone because they go into this like, so step one is, can you build something in a micro environment, like very small scale, even if it's not 100% the business model you want it to be involved in? Can you build something sustainable on its own with profit at small revenue numbers?
Hmm.
Because if you can scale that up on the side, because it's kind of self-sustaining in terms of money. And so that thing can grow passively on the side and you can then have a valuation. And I would just say part of this is also being the art of selling a small company versus these billion-dollar companies that you see all the time sold, or these hundreds and millions of dollars being invested in companies. Those are banner exits. I can't say that I've had, $1 billion exit yet. There will be one at some point. But the reality is for me, some of the exits were brought to my attention because I just played in a market where there was someone that was interested early on. Two of my first companies that sold, one of them, the competitor bought it.
Hmm.
I had a company called furniturestock.com, one of the worst websites I've ever built in my life. Made in Dreamweaver with iframes. And it was, I mean, I think if you go into the Wayback Machine, you'll find this nightmare website that I built. And I sold it to a company because we were competing against them on margin. We were buying the same product from the same manufacturer, but they had a big warehouse and a big retail space. And I just had a website. And so I think that was brought into my sphere. And I just had a side hustle where I had a buddy of mine on the weekend. We'd hop in a truck and deliver furniture that I
Hmm.
sold during the
That's
week.
funny.
So, I mean, that, and we were selling on eBay and we were probably one of the early online furniture e-tailers. And I think we were successful because we just didn't have margin and it was all side hustle weekend business, right? It was like, you can buy it during the week and we'll deliver it on the weekends. I had a third party logistics company that would come pick up and ship to other states if we sold out of state. We didn't sell a ton out of state because it's really expensive to ship stuff.
Yeah.
But other than that, like that's how it built. And having a full-time career, it was like there were some nights I went to bed at 4 a.m. and got 2 hours, get up, and I'd be in the office at 6. So I mean, that's how it got done. I just, like I said, I wouldn't recommend that to
Yeah.
anybody because you really burn. And then sometimes weekends I was dead, and it would be working 18 hours Saturday and 20 hours Sunday, and then back in the office first thing at 5:30, 6 a.m. on Monday. So
Yeah.
it was a lot of work. And then I got some remote flexibility over time because I was traveling for work. So that freed up a lot of extra time to build something on the side and exit. The exit side of it is a little bit tricky. And I would just say you can sell a company online right now. There's 100 different sites where you can list your company and sell it. So it doesn't have to be a big venture to garner interest from an investor that has potential opportunities. Acquire.com became really big. I don't know if you know Alex Hermosi and
Yep.
that whole crew. I mean, so there's a lot of people in that space where you can list your small startup, even if it's pre-revenue, and still sell the concept or idea or business. So you can build something on the side and sell it while you have a full-time career. It's
Yeah.
just, like I said, it's a lot of work.
Yeah. Yeah. And I like that you've recognized the lessons. You're like, I probably wouldn't recommend that, but like it is, it took what it took type of thing. So
Trial through fire. Like a
y-
not the greatest idea, but listen, sometimes it takes that level of effort to get it done. So
yeah.
if you're willing to put in the time, effort, energy, bleed a little bit, you'll get
Y-
there.
Yeah, and speaking of Alex Hormozi, I heard him the other day talking about like you're gonna have different seasons of your life. Like you'll have a season of little sleep and stress, and then you'll have a season of like bliss and enjoyment, and then back to a season of craziness. Like just embrace that season that you're in and know that like it's not gonna be like that forever, whether you're grinding your face off or you're, absolutely crushing it. Like it's gonna be that roller coaster of different things. So,
Yeah.
um,
And that's what you sign up. Like
right.
they should tell people, if you're going to be an entrepreneur, this is what you're signing up for.
Yeah. With exits, like on the other side of companies that are buying companies, like what are some of the top reasons that you see like a competitor want to buy a competitor? Is it just because like they already have the systems built out? Like every time I see different acquisitions like that, I'm like, like that's interesting, but
A
like
lot
what
of
are
lot
the
of different
intricacies
reasons.
of that, you know?
I mean, if you think about it, you just have to think like them, right? You have tech and they're like, buy it or build it, right? That could
Yeah,
be one
true.
reason. Um, it could just be competitive nature, like you're the only other competitor in the market. So do we want to compete and lose market share? It's not that big of a market.
Or
Or do
just
we
buy it.
buy it at 2x or 3 or 4x and we know we're going to make 10x on it? Uh, there's 100 different reasons. If they're a bigger organization buying another organization, it could also just be that they need to buy the revenue or profitability or the customer base. It's like, look, we can have a 5x multiple if we buy the customer base on our product. So there's all sorts of different reasons for those acquisitions from a competitive perspective. But I also think there's a bunch of people out there with cash, real estate investors and others that are like, I want to traverse into tech, or, I want to diversify into something else. And maybe they're not as sophisticated in the space that you're in that are buying. And so, there's people that just want to operate companies, or they're looking for, they're just out there making investments to buy companies to grow and find synergies with. You find a lot of indirect synergy buys. So
Yeah.
like, hey, I'm going to buy this company. It has nothing to do with my business, but there's a synergy between customers.
Hmm.
So I'll be able to sell my product and the revenue from the other company. So there's a lot of reasons there, but it's also the active marketing of it too, right? If you put your company on the market or you're working with a broker, sometimes they help push that agenda a bit further.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. And yeah, I mean, we could probably talk for hours about the different reasons there, but was just kind of curious off a couple of them off the top of your head. And you've bootstrapped all of your companies, right?
For the most part, yeah. I mean, there's been a couple that I had small investments
Yeah.
in, um,
But it
but
was never like a Series C or any of
no, and
those like,
no VCs, no private equity money. It's always been bootstrapped. Now, one of the companies that I was involved in, um, I was one of the investors in the company, and my investment was purely sweat equity and helping
hmm.
build the company up. And I got a small piece of the exit, so it wasn't like a full exit for me. but I was involved in it early on. So it was really a unique opportunity. So they're not always all the same. And, I always caution this. I've said this 100 times. Like people are like, oh, I've had 8 exits. They're not all glamorous. Some of them were like, we're in trouble. I don't know if I can prop this thing up anymore. There's somebody that's probably a better operator or has better tools or tech. This isn't a business I want to be involved in anymore. And you exit, and it's not like the happy moment that everybody expects it to be. And yeah, you get a little chunk of change, but at the end of the day, it's like that's not really what I was expecting to go through. Like, so it's not always, oh my God, you've had 8 exits. This is amazing. Like some of them are just not what you want.
Yeah.
And some of them are forced, could also be, and mine haven't been forced, but there was, exits I've been involved in that kind of had to politically get out of a business. And so there's all sorts of reasons to do those things, but I just caution that like people are like, oh man, it's amazing. That's what I want to do. It's like, it's not all, it's not great. And the acquisition is the easy part. It's the integration of the acquisition. It's the changing hands of ownership and the knowledge transfer. That's the hard part, right? So people don't really plan for that. And then they find out how difficult it is to move a company to a new owner. And a lot of companies fail in that segment. And so it's really difficult, especially if you have earnouts and others. Fortunately enough for me, I've never had a ton of the earnout side of it. So I've never had as much pain there. But it's not easy.
Yeah, especially all the change management attributes of it as well, people, processes, all of those things.
Yeah.
And I appreciate the humility, by the way, of saying, hey, like 8 exits on paper ish, right? But like they're not all glamorous. So I appreciate you mentioning that.
Yeah.
So I guess from the good exit side, do you have one that you're most proud of?
I mean, I wouldn't say there's one better than another. Like I'm proud of all of them, even the ones that weren't great. It was such an amazing experience for me to learn all the way through it. I've had some that were bigger than others, which are always, happier moments to see, a wire transfer come through with large amounts. Those are great. But I mean, it's so funny that you would think the world changes that day and it doesn't.
Yeah.
I think, and then your brain starts spinning like, what's next, right? Fortunately for me, I have 100 other things I want to do. So I was always like, okay, I already have the other one and I'm already building it. And I've already been behind the scenes planning and setting things up. And in some cases, I was running them all, simultaneously. So I wouldn't say there's one that, is better than another. They've all given me, different lessons, and I've had joy with all of them, right? Even just operating the companies for me, it's like watching your kid grow up,
Yeah.
so you have this crazy idea, and next thing you know, you're doing some work, and sometimes you get into a space where you're like, that's my work, and you see it in the wild, and you're like, this is amazing. And so even all the way through to exit, where somebody believes in your idea so much that they're willing to acquire the company and take it over, it's amazing to get to that point, even when they're not, successful exits. So I think I've enjoyed them all for different reasons.
Yeah, yeah, no, I love that you mentioned that. What advice would you give? And I asked this question because I was reading an article the other day about entrepreneurs post exit and how a lot of them kind of have that like shrug their shoulders moment, like, well, now what? What advice would you have for maybe anybody listening that has sold a company and they're like, well, now
Now
what?
what?
You know?
You should probably start thinking about that beforehand.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, listen, some people get approached and then it happens really fast. None of it's fast. I shouldn't say that.
But
When
it
it
seems
happens,
fast from you because you're like, wait,
yeah. I
this came
mean,
out of
and then it's a
nowhere. Like,
blink of the eye. You get
yeah.
caught up in the moment because you're like, yes, this is a big
Hmm.
deal and it could change my life. And, for those who are having their first exit, they get really too fixated on the emotion, and they feel like they're crossing, into a finish line, but that's exactly what it is. So having a plan after is important. But I think what's really good is for people to take a step back and start building that checklist that I talked about. When I build the next thing, what does it need to be for me?
Mm.
Not so much for the money, because maybe now they have a little extra padding or a little security that they can rest on for a short period of time. But I would just say, like an entrepreneur, it's runway. You have a time period, right? So it's important to start building what your next thing is for purpose, because I feel like it fulfills you as you build the next thing. And so not my more recent ventures have been purpose led, which is how does this fit into my lifestyle? What impact am I going to make to a community or
Mm,
culture or society? How can I do things to have a legacy? Not
mm,
something I really cared before about, but I actually want to make an impact. So now it's like, okay, if I could do things the way I want, because you finally have a small bit of breathing space, it's a really unique time to not be in a rush to just go do the monetary thing again.
mm.
Because I think that's what you're talking about is they're like, now what monetarily? Not now what do I want to be when I grow up? Or how do I want this to impact the rest of the world in the
Sure.
next steps I take? So I think that's why you see there's a lot of impact funds, right? You see a lot of investors who are like, I want to invest in impact focused businesses
Mm,
because those are people who finally got past the money thing and they're like thinking bigger now and they have a mission and people want to, I said it early on, people want to believe in the mission. They need a
mm,
leader to that they can look at and say, we're actually going to make an impact here. And so you end up building bigger companies because you have this mission and you are making a positive impact on society or business or something. And it's thoughtfully led, not how do we get to EBITDA, right? Like
mm. Yeah.
so so I mean that's why I think that's a great time to actually take a step back and really start
Mm,
building out like what does that business look like and where do I see those gaps that I can fill? And that's really, you know, a clear space to do it instead of a panic moment of like, how do I make my next dollar? Because usually you're okay. I mean, hopefully, if you didn't exit and you're like, okay, now I'm in trouble.
mm.
Well,
Yeah. Yeah.
maybe don't exit then.
Right.
Um, so yeah, that's really what I would recommend.
Yeah, yeah. No, I love that. I love all the advice there. I love just the thoughtful process that you're putting into it as well. Speaking of purpose, mission, and all those great things, I know everybody listening is probably annoyed by credit card processing fees when they go out to eat. We were just joking about that. So
Sure.
I would love for you just to talk about VeriFi for a little bit because I love the website that I checked out. I love from what I can see from the outside looking in, like the mission you guys are trying to do and all the great things there. So I'd love for you to tell everybody what that is
Sure.
and what you're working on and how you even thought of that idea too.
Well, I mean, VeriFee was not really a brainchild of how I could help anyone. It came from a frustration
Hmm.
because I had my first business, but like one of my first companies, I mentioned furniture stock. I took credit cards and people would charge back. And as the business owner, you had to deal with, you know, these chargebacks. And it was really difficult on me. And then I became high risk because I had a lot of chargebacks. And most of it was like we would deliver furniture and they're like, hey, there's a scuff on the back of this couch. And it's like, but we delivered and it was fine. Did you move? Like, so I had to eat all of these chargebacks and they're like, come and pick it up. Now I have furniture. They got their money back. I didn't want the furniture to begin with. We didn't have a warehouse. And I lived in an apartment at the time. So I was renting garages and putting more and more stuff that I had returns on. So it really impacted me. And then as I got into e-commerce, it got even more and more difficult. And I became a reseller for credit card processing to empower other revenue streams for my e-commerce business. So I had a company called Original Click, and we were focused on e-commerce development. And it was really just, you know, another revenue stream. And I would plug into it. And, you know, over the years, I saw how that industry operated and I got into credit card processing heavily. And I realized how gimmicky and bad it was to show somebody a rate and fee and then change their pricing at will without even notifying. So as the business owner, they think they're paying one thing, but they end up paying more and more and more and more. And interchange, which is the cost structure that Visa, MasterCard, like you and I swipe a card, like I get my rewards and the bank it makes money and you know, Visa, MasterCard has to make money. So there's a lot of layers in between there. And that cost structure is so complicated that if I were to hand you that 65-page document, you just never it's like an impossible thing to read. So how is Mo and Joe's truck and tow going to understand this document? They're
Mm,
not. Like we handed it to a forensic accountant and they're like, give me a couple months. I'll try to find some books and some other stuff to try to identify all these interchange guides. And then when you get a credit card processing statement, like there's no direct correlation to what's on that statement and what's in this guide. Plus, if I hand you a card, you can't tell me how much that card's going to cost when you swipe it. So you just have to trust that they're going to charge you the right rates and fees, and they don't. And so I'm not trying to, I'm not trying to say that Visa and MasterCard are the problem, because they're really the smaller part of the problem. The credit card processors, they add then a markup on top of that. And then there's a reseller, and then they add a markup on top of that. And then there's these integrated software companies who've now taken, all of the credit card processing and put it into a tool like Stripe or Square, all these different tools that now plug into an e-commerce system. And then e-commerce companies signs an exclusive deal with Stripe or Square. So you see all these layers, right?
Yeah.
So all that stuff adds up, and the end result is the company's not going to take a bath. Consumers are.
Mm-hmm.
So what happened over the last 3 or 4 years was like, hey, I have a better idea. We're just going to pass this on to the consumer. And so now, you go to the bar and you order a drink, and they're like, but if you're going to pay by credit card, like, do you take cash? Nope. So wait a second. I have to pay by credit card. You're not even giving me another option. And you're going to charge me 3%, in some places now 4%.
Yeah.
80% of the cards used in the US are debit cards. The cost interchange for a debit card is 0.05%.
Hmm.
Who's making the balance of that money? It's all these layers.
Yeah.
And so, then they got even, and this became a gimmick, right? So all of these back alley treaties that were signed with software companies, like, hey, you use my software, you don't get to negotiate the rates and fees. You're stuck. All your customer data is stuck. All the credit card numbers that you have on file that you don't have access to, they're stuck. So now you're kind of forced. You have no, so you can see where I'm going with this, right?
Yeah.
You have no choice in who you can work with, and it's predatory. And so when I had a company called Payment Brokers, and I sold the assets out of that company. And when I sold those assets, I was like, this business is like really bad. And I know the game now. So when I set up my next business, I'm going to do everything I can to negotiate my rates and fees down. And I'm going to do an analysis and see exactly what the processor is making. I'm going to go back to them because I know the margins they need to make. And I'm going to fight them to get it down to where I want it to be. And then I'm going to watch it, because the game of this is they can change pricing at will without notice. Now, I should say, I'll caution this little without notice. They put it in fine print on page 85 of a statement you get every month. And it's encrypted in terminology like regulatory and compliance fees are changing. No, it's not. It's just not. Like, we know the industry. I know nothing changed regulatorily. You're just saying that so that I don't know how to read it. And there's no regulatory body over pricing. So who is helping these companies? So I helped a buddy, I helped my own company, and then I saved a friend of mine, $6,000 a month. And I was like, wait a second here. This is a business. Like, I could help all of the small and medium companies, because so when I saw this problem, I went, there's a problem here. I wonder how big the problem is. Like, how many people are way overpaying? Sometimes people are paying 5 and 6%. I actually had a statement I looked at recently. They're paying 7%.
Dang.
That's a silent partnership to just exchange money securely.
Yeah, seriously.
So I was like, okay, how big is the problem? So I went back and I looked at a bunch of data. There's a company that produces data for the entire industry. And I was like, okay, how much money are these processors making? Forget Visa, MasterCard. I still want to keep I don't want to fight rewards.
Yeah.
Dick Durbin and a bunch of other people are fighting Visa, MasterCard over how much money they charge. That's not really the biggest problem. The bigger problem is what happens after that. The processor, the software company, the integrated software provider, the reseller, the ISO, the VAR, there's 100 people in between them. So let me go look at how much money they make. So if I took their margins, standard margins for a company, at let's say 20%, which isn't standard, it's a $50 billion a year problem in the US.
Wow.
Okay, there's 38 million businesses. So you're like, it's not that big of a problem. Let me start over again. If you took Fortune 500s, none of them, I shouldn't say none, 90% of them don't have this problem. So who's flipping the bill?
The
It's
small businesses.
small and medium sized companies who are the backbone of the country, have this weight of $50 billion on their back. How could I cut it in half?
Mm.
And it would just be giving them the data, having transparency, not switching anything. Stay with your processor, keep your hardware. Don't like everybody, like, hey, come over to my credit card processing company, we'll save you money. And that's just a bait and switch game of I'll give you low introductory rates. And then two
And
and
then,
three
yeah,
months later, we call it bipping it up. They add a basis point here, 5 basis points here, 3 cents there, $5. And by the end of it, when you look at the bottom line, if you tally up the total fees divided into the total revenue, you get a percent, you get a decimal, move it over 2 decimal places, you get a percent. If you just looked at that once a month, I guarantee you'd find that what you originally signed for, that's not what you're paying today.
mm,
And it's so complicated, no one knows how to read it. So it makes it even more complex that there are 3,000 different rates and fees. Three, and this is a only US problem. In Canada, they don't have this problem. In Europe, they don't have this problem. Different discussion for another time.
yeah,
It's a uniquely US problem. So I said, could I help enough companies and shave off $1 billion of indebtedness to the profit margins of credit card processors, not Visa, MasterCard, but the processors, the guys who are preying on these small companies that can't read it and slowly just raise their pricing up because they can't.
mm,
And look, the local pizza place, Papa's Pizza isn't switching, going and buying another $800 terminal and switching their processing, doing all this work. They got enough problems
yeah,
with staffing and buying dough and importing stuff. Like it's enough headache that this is not a line item that they're like, I don't know, it's like 4% ish. It's what we paid last month. What they're doing is just passing it on to consumers. So I'm fighting two problems. One, we're overcharging the business owner. And two, they're passing the buck. They're just like, how do we pass it to the consumer? And now it's like, Visa's like, this is a great idea. Pass it to the consumer and we can charge 4% on something that costs 0.05.
mm,
So that's what we're fighting. And we're doing it with transparency, honesty, and we built a machine learning tool. All of my team will call it AI, but it's just machine learning technology. We grab a statement, we drop it in. It identifies all of the different interchange
mm,
rates. It tells me the buckets and categories of where they're being overcharged. And we just help them negotiate with their existing vendor, right? And instead of charging them for software and saying, hey, pay us all this money up front to do all the analysis and negotiation, we do all of that pro bono and we only work on a gain share. So if we save them $1, we split it with them. So, and that money's in their pocket. So it's a great no risk, no effort, and I'll say extremely low time invested for the company, 20 minutes, maybe an hour max. And the end result could be 1 to 2, maybe even 3% savings on their credit card processing expenses. Now we've reduced people 20 and 30% of the total expense. And I've seen even some that are 60 and 70%. So this could be significant for any company. Now, there are some companies we can't work with. Really small companies don't have enough leverage. And we're working on a solution for that too, because I'm trying to help everybody. And I'm hopeful to launch an article here shortly to say, quit passing. We got to stop passing the buck. Inflation over minus 2020 and some weird stuff that happened, right? like,
yeah,
you know, like BC before COVID, inflation was an average of 3%, like
right.
2.7 or something over the last 25 years. If you just allow another 3% surcharge, we're talking about doubling the inflation rate because Visa
Mm,
and MasterCard decide to push this thing through. We got to stop this. And there's got to be a point where everybody's voice is heard in that. And that's also the consumer. So when we talk to a business owner, we're like, you're also a consumer. Like, don't forget
yeah,
why we're doing it. I'm not doing this because, it's a business for businesses. It's a business to fight this junk fee that they just decided to shove down everybody's throat. And in some states now, they're talking about 4%.
Mm.
Like, where does it end?
Yeah.
So, I think we have a good handle on it. We're getting some traction, but we're also like in this weird, I'm trying to also be anonymous. We should have called the company Robinhood. I say this on almost every interview I've been on. We'd have been sued 100 times over,
Yeah.
but we're trying to fight Goliath to give money back to the small guy,
Yeah.
and put money back in their pockets directly. And we're taking the risk of doing all the negotiations. Sometimes they're not successful, so we put in work a lot of the times, and the processor comes back and says, no, we're not going to negotiate. But 90% of the time we're successful, and it's helpful for them, it's helpful for their customers, because I think there are plenty of people now, and we bought some social media data. There's a lot of people that are not happy about the surcharging, and
Yeah.
it's coming to a grocery store soon.
Hmm.
Like, that's going to be a game changer. When things cost 3% more at the grocery store, it's going to be a big deal. When things raised 1%, people were in an uproar. Imagine just tagging on another 3%. Listen, even if you don't see it on the bill, someone's paying it.
Hmm.
And it's definitely not the processor.
Yeah,
so,
definitely not.
so that's what we do. That's what VeriFee was born to do. And now we're expanding into other categories: treasury services, energy cost reduction.
Mm.
And again, we're not trying to sell people on different, vendors. We're trying to help them negotiate with who they have. So
Yeah.
think of it like an extended procurement team, with a sophisticated tech behind it that can help use real data to be leveraged with your vendor, something that most of these small companies will never do. So that's really our target and our goal, to try to help.
Man, I love all of that you mentioned. I'm sure people are super excited that you're doing this, especially as you just explained just the industry in general, with the couple facts that you hit me with. I mean, that's pretty mind blowing that majority of the Fortune 500s aren't paying it. It's the small and medium sized businesses, and just 65 pages with this fee and this transaction is involved. I mean, I'm just thinking, like, if I owned like a little barber like your buddy, it's like I got a million other things to deal with, and I don't have the time or bandwidth to just be like, oh, let me just read this document. So I think you're solving like a massive problem here.
And we're using, we'll say AI, but we're not. I mean, we're using machine learning technology to do it,
Right.
right? We're actually applying something to help fight back, because
Yeah.
they're going to use it too. Don't forget, like, there's already in 2025, you're going to hear a word: embedded finance.
Hmm.
This is the most dangerous thing to happen ever. Not because I love technology. I love that I can scan my face and pay for something, or walk into a place and like tap and I'm paid. And I love this frictionless environment. And I feel pretty safe and secure about it. Like, somebody steals my, credit card, I'm not really super concerned, right?
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to get the money back. So they have done an amazing job. And I think there's value to it. So I'm not trying to take away from that. But this embedded thing, what they should call it is, we're removing free market choice from the
Mm.
market. We're embedding ourselves in things that you will have no choice but to use it. And that way we can charge whatever we want. In the industry, internally, they're like, how do we make payments sticky?
Mm.
Sticky meaning they can't leave us, they can't change, they can't switch. We have an exclusivity. And that's when, once you're exclusive, then you have no free market competition, and they can charge you whatever they want, especially when they own the payment record, the payment data, your customer record. And there are a ton of software companies that have signed up because they're like, I have all the customer data. And they're like, great, we can help, we'll monetize it for you, but you can't use any other processor.
Mm. And your
This should
stuff.
be, and this should be illegal, right? So you buy, and also hardware. And I'll end with this piece because I think it's important. What happened with cell phones? The FCC came down and said, if you have a phone, you should be able to use any provider you want. Because
Mm.
originally, that's not how it worked. They said, if you have a piece of hardware, you have to use AT&T, and that's the only way you're going to get the iPhone, the end, right? And they kiboshed that immediately, because they were like, wait a second, you just paid $1,000 for this device. You should be able to use whoever you want. That's not how it works in credit card processing. You buy a device, they program it, you decide to leave, that thing's a paperweight.
Mm.
So it's the same issue with software. They're like, you can't port it. And by the way, all that customer data and all the stuff that you built in there, you can't port that stuff over. And their credit card numbers, good luck with that. They have something called a vault. So they're like, we have the token, we have the vault. So now if you have recurring payment business, software specifically, you can't move that to a different provider. So
Mm.
you have no way to negotiate, and they hold the keys. And the more embedded they become, the more they can charge, the less opportunity you have to leave. Right. So they've become silent partners of these companies, and we will fight tooth and nail to win against this. Not, and listen, my goal is that my company goes out of business, that there's some regulatory or compliance
Mm.
thing that comes in that says you can't do this. We need to clear this out. They should have a cap on how much they can charge above interchange. And I'm the most hated person in payments for saying that. But I'll happily go down in history doing that. And so for me, this was a passion project that now has turned into a really serious business. And the more we can touch people, the better. It's why I'm going on these podcasts to try to reach as many
Yeah.
people as we can to help. We can't help everybody. And, another cease and desist letter will come saying, you got to stop doing this. These banks will fight us. At some point, we'll lose that fight. But until then, we will fight every single one of them to help every business we can.
Yeah, dude, I love it, man. I can tell you're super passionate about it, and you'll have a deep mission to obviously make a very positive impact on an industry and just situation that needs some help. So, I just want to thank you for what you're doing. I'm sure everybody listening is pumped up as well. Like, man, Jeremy, thank you so much. This is huge. So that said, like, where can people find you and your business and connect with you further?
Yeah. So verifee.com. That's where you can find us. VeriFee. And I'm on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active. You feel free to reach out to me too. Like anything I can do to help. And I think even for entrepreneurs as well, like if you're in the startup space, we even wrote a book, a small booklet. It's a guide on like DIY stuff you can do. Even companies we can't help, like we invested some money and time and energy in helping people we can't help. Like
Mm.
here's a guide, things you should do. And then as you grow up, reach out to us. Like as your company starts to evolve and you're in a threshold where we can help, the companies we've had the most success with do more than $50,000 a month.
Mm.
So
Okay.
from 50,000 to 500 million, we've had a lot of success. And we have companies that do billions. So it's not that all the Fortune 50s can't. There are advanced things there that we can do to help, like debit routing and interchange optimization. But the small guys, anybody could reach out to us and we'll help anybody, even just point them in the right direction, no cost. Like we're happy to say, they're like, hey, I'm looking at these three companies. Which one should I use? We'll respond to that because my whole team has been trained that that's what our mission is. So even if we don't have a way to monetize it, we're here to actually point them in the right direction.
Cool, man. I'll put all that in the show notes for the listeners to connect with you there. Obviously, because you guys are doing some amazing stuff, and I appreciate you mentioned kind of the ideal company that you work with as well. I know there's opportunities to work if you're kind of outside of those parameters. But again, Jeremy, thank you so much, man, for being on the podcast. I love what you're doing. I hope to see you on like Capitol Hill, like just fighting some of these big banks one day or something like
Oh
that.
man.
So
Hopefully it doesn't come to that. Hopefully somebody else steps in to do that part.
I'm
I'm
just
like, I'll fight
picturing
it from the ground here, but I don't know about
I,
Capitol.
I'm just picturing like Braveheart scene, and you're
Oh
like on the
God.
horse with like no processing stick or something like that. So,
I'll let the politicians do that part.
yep,
I want to be in the trenches with the businesses. So
for sure, brother. Awesome, man. Well, thanks again for hopping on. Really appreciate it.
sounds good, man. Great to meet you.
Yep.